Welcome to the Tearing It Up podcast. I'm your host, Taryn. We'll be tearing it up, tearing it down, and tearing it apart, dissecting all things related to those who deviate from the standard. From leaders of their industry to leaders of mediocrity, and maybe a gear review or two thrown in. We shoot the shit and let the conversations flow, so if that's not your style, this may not be for you. Otherwise, listen in. Hope to light a fire in you somehow. Oh, and we're on. It's so weird not seeing somebody else, and I don't have my volume thing there, so hopefully it's loud enough here. So hey, everybody. This is a really exciting podcast because it is in person. I'm with Heather Kelly today, and I think the only in-person podcasts we've done have just been Amber and I, and you all out there know that even those are rare. So this is very rare to actually have my guest here too, who is from Alaska and just happened to be in Reno. And I was like, oh my God, I can come down there. Let's do this in person. Heather's also our first repeat guest who isn't one of our best friends. That's
fun.
Yes, I think our only repeat guest has been our friend Hillary. And we keep talking about okay, it's time now to start bringing people back because we've been having so many interviews now, and we're going on year 3 in October. So there's time to catch up with people. But you especially, so much has happened in the last 8 months, because it was early February that you were on last. And Heather's Choice has just since then gone through so many exciting things that I can't wait to talk about. One of them, which I think will segue into kind of a big chunk of this conversation, is the fact that you guys were on Shark Tank. So I'd love to talk about that and how that kind of has steamrolled into what's happening now. I know you guys just made an exciting announcement for the community and how they can support Heather's Choice. We're just going to get right into it. First of all, I guess, why are you down here in Reno?
That's a great question. So I feel like we come to Reno all the time because it seems to be sort of the hub for all things outdoor trade shows. Mm-hmm. So we just wrapped up the Worldwide Buying Show. I think that's our 4th or 5th time being there. And it was really valuable for me to be in the booth because typically I send one of my girls like Brooke or Abby. But for me to be in the booth and to be reminded how many people have never actually heard of Heather's Choice and have never eaten a packaroon. And it blows me away every time that I'm like, how have I been doing this for 10 years and these people still don't know who we are?
Especially at these shows that you're at repeatedly.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's some turnover in the industry and maybe there's new buyers and things. But even so, I'm sure more often than not, it's the same buyers, or they've seen it. They've been in the industry at least. Maybe they're at a different store than they used to or whatnot. But that it just doing things like that or coming across those things reminds me of sometimes I feel like I am in a bubble. Uh-huh. Oh yeah, we live in this bubble where we think everyone knows about this, even just in the outdoor industry at all. I mean, just today, booking this co-working space, this woman who practices yoga regularly, she was like, what kind of yoga do you do? I was like, mostly paddleboard yoga. And she was like, what? Never heard of such a thing. And she's like, it's like goat yoga. I was like, well, no. I mean, I think goat yoga is a little more just fun. Weird. Yeah. I'm like, there's paddleboard yoga's been around a while, and there's a lot of actual scientific data about water and being around it and things. So I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. But again, I'm just like, have you not heard about this? This is not crazy. And so for you to be in a place that is in your industry and run into people that haven't heard of Heather's Choice, I'm just, what the heck?
Yeah, it's a good reminder for me on the marketing side that it literally takes 7, 8, 9, 10 times for somebody to hear something before it finally lands.
Yeah.
And so that's been a good reminder for me because I'm sure you feel that way when you post something on social media. You assume that everybody heard you.
Yes.
And everybody got the message. And this is a stark reminder that even though you sound like a broken record, mm-hmm. or you feel like a broken record, nobody actually heard what you had to say. So you have to say it 10,000 more times to like get your message across.
I love that. And it's really validating for me actually in this moment, because just this morning I was thinking of making a LinkedIn post and I was like, oh my God, do I sound like a broken record? Like, how many times are you going to see this, hear this? I'm just being ignored because people have heard this from me a million times, where it's like, no, actually they haven't, because of the things like the algorithms and whatnot, or even just with the many hats I've worn and the things that I do in my life, I have friends who are like, wait, you're doing that? And I'm like, wow, even you guys aren't following along, which on one hand, I'm like, if that's okay. That means I have people in my life who do not live on social media. I actually feel like a lot of my good friends don't use it. And that's why I also kind of fall off of it and whatnot. But it's just a good reminder that this happens to everybody, and you do have to just really keep saying it over and over and over again.
Yeah, totally. So that was definitely valuable to go and to do this show and be reminded, okay, there's still a lot of ground to cover. Mm-hmm. And it's also interesting being in the room with brands that are hundreds of thousands of times bigger than you, and still being an emerging brand. Even though I've been at this for 10 years, Heather's Choice is still tiny compared to anybody else who's there. But it definitely shows me that there's still a ton of potential for the brand and a ton still for us to do, and a ton of consumer education, because I saw it in that convention hall. Nobody has packed a lunch. Everybody's hungry. And you can just see around like the 12 o'clock hour, people start to like claw at the walls a little bit because they didn't think about bringing any food with them. And I fed tons of people at the show, just adding water to a bag and like sending them back to their booth. And I'm like, okay, this is an entire different use case for the product, but it's very, very real.
Yeah, absolutely. At GOA in June, the trade show I was at, that another gripe people had, other than the crazy AC and how cold they were, was the snacks, the food. Like, they provided a great lunch, but the snack options throughout the day were very limited. There was not a lot of breakfast options, and you're up and at it early. And obviously there's more cases than just like trade shows that these things happen. It's going to work all day. And I think we talked about this a little bit last time, but I mean, I'm on the go. I was at home all morning working, and the only thing I ate was a honey stinger waffle. And I'm heading down here. Oh, I did have a smoothie. I made a smoothie on my way down, and I was like, I got a meat stick in my purse. But I was like, yeah, actually some Heather's Choice spaghetti sounds really good right now, even though it's like 90 degrees. So the uses for it, and getting that in people's minds too, of just having something really good and easily accessible on the go. Like, it doesn't have to just be backpacking. So reaching that market, because you're seeing it right there, where hopefully this clicks to the people that you fed, because they're the people making these buying decisions for their store. Like, hey, remember how I ate some Heather's Choice because I was at this convention or trade show and didn't have a lunch? Like, great reason to have in my store. I can tell my staff this story, and hopefully that passes down, but it becomes a game of telephone that the staff isn't actually telling those stories to the people walking around in the store.
And I think that that's going to be just a really interesting dynamic for Heather's Choice in the years to come, because I do think there's going to come this tipping point where all of a sudden people get it, and it's going to take a ton of effort on our end, but I see that clear as day. There's going to come a point in time where all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, of course I have a dehydrated meal in my purse, in my briefcase, in my roller bag, whatever.
Yeah.
An event that I find myself in a situation where there's no food. And I think you and I talked about this last time too, but I don't think people understand how much better they feel when they're well fed.
Yeah. It's what's interesting to me is I feel like this conversation usually stems around women being hangry. I don't hear a lot of guys talking about it. My boyfriend goes like all day without eating. I don't get it. I need to eat often. That's why I always have like a snack in my bag or something. Like I start to notice, okay, I'm getting a little, angsty or something. I need a snack or a nap, right? Those are usually the
You're like,
answers.
so I'm basically a 3-year-old.
Yeah, totally. Exactly. But, after you eat, like you just mentioned, you feel so much better, but getting those messages to click is the hardest part, because that's all you're doing is screaming it from the rooftops. And again, it's that game of telephone. No one's really hearing it. And how do you get people to hear it? That I feel like is the hardest part of any small business. How do I get my message across? And taking opportunities like being on Shark Tank. I'm sure that was a huge one, where you're getting in front of on national TV. What was that experience like for you? Have you done anything like it before? Like ever been on TV at all? A little news broadcast in Alaska, anything?
Oh my gosh, nothing like that. I will say that the whole Shark Tank experience from start to finish was world class in terms of how professional they are with onboarding you, with conducting the interviews, getting you prepared for it, flying you down there. Like, it's unbelievable to me how much the people who work for Shark Tank love their jobs.
Oh, that's so cool to hear.
It's awesome. There was one woman I met, I think she's now 13 years in. This is the 16th season of the show. So when people get jobs there, they stay.
Wow.
So regardless of what experience I or anybody else has as an entrepreneur on the show, it's a really well-oiled machine. And having that experience of being prepped to go on TV and then actually going and being under those really hot lights.
I always see people sweating their ass
off. Oh
my
gosh. There's a reason why they give you those little... Do you remember those strips when you were a teenager that you would use to like blot your face, like the little oil strips? Yeah. Those are like a very useful thing to have because you always look greasy.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, but my Shark Tank experience was something epic, and it really shined a light on how limited my thinking was of what Heather's Choice was for. Because I went out there thinking, okay, they're not going to care about the backpacking meals. All they're going to care about is the packaroons. And the packaroons are going to be like my winning product that they're going to latch onto. And they could not have cared less about the packaroons.
Really? They were, yes. And I did watch it. And there's a couple things with it that really stick to me that I'll ask you about, but that I'm sure you've talked about. But so they were more impressed with the meals themselves and wanted you to focus there.
They get pitched snack foods all the time. And so the really loud feedback from them was everybody and their mother has some new energy bar.
Like an electrolyte mix too.
Totally. And they're like, you know what? The meals are super differentiated. We've never seen anything like this. You should be selling this to every soccer mom and every college kid and Costco and Target and Trader Joe's. And I'm like, I guess they missed the part where I said that we make these suckers 300 at a time in our 1,600 square foot kitchen in Anchorage, Alaska. Clearly they weren't listening when I said that. And so that becomes this whole rigmarole of, sure, I absolutely see where there's a much larger market opportunity, even beyond the show that I was just at. Let's say the show that I was just doing in the outdoor industry, I would kind of put a number on it and say, okay, I think I could do somewhere between $5 and $10 million a year selling backpacking food. Really rough math. Going into something like a Costco or a Trader Joe's or a Target or Sam's Club, whatever, all of a sudden now you're talking about doing like $50 million a year worth of business.
And that would be just probably just a Costco deal in itself.
Yes.
Right? Because you're thinking about how that would probably entail a box of like 6 meals that's going to Costco, not one bag. And all the boxes just in that one Costco itself is millions of dollars.
I talked to one guy recently. They had a kale chip business selling into Costco. and it was $20 million a year worth of kale chips.
I can't imagine the amount of kale. I just talked to my boyfriend's mom about this because she has a garden. The kale's going off. And she made zucchini bread. It's too bad we can't make much out of kale besides kale chips. But if you do that, you're going to use all your kale and get one little sheet of kale chips. So that's not really like efficient. I cannot imagine how much kale for 20 million.
He said I think it was like 14 truckloads a week worth of product that they were shipping.
Oh my God.
And I don't think people realize just all the mechanics of that. Like, sure, you could say yes. Like, you get a phone call from Costco and they're like, hey, we want to bring you into a regional store. And you're like, great, I have to make all of that product in advance, ship it to them, wait 30, 60, 90 days for them to pay me. And then in the process of all that, there's going to be a reorder. So I've basically got to float it twice.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff that still, for me as an entrepreneur, I trip over myself all the time because I'm like, how does anybody
do it?
How do they do it?
Yeah.
It's
how
wild.
do you get the capital first without... And obviously by doing things like Shark Tank, pitching investors, but that's where I feel like the struggle is really finding that connection. A lot of times I feel like it's a couple people who are like backing it that are the cash cow,
right,
and can do this. And many people don't have those connections because not like all of that money means you need a 5 times the bigger team, bigger facility. Also product, which was the thing that stuck out to me that they mentioned on the show of like lessening your standards basically for your meals to make it more affordable. And that's where I was like, oh, she's done. Nope. She's not gonna, she ain't going with this. Like, no way. And, I understand this is why, what people call the sellouts. It's like, they have lowered their standards, and this is what you see a lot with businesses who were small and niche, and now they've grown and got bigger. You're like, oh, wow, how they got so big. Also, their product has now become less quality. I'm noticing something ripping more, tearing more, thinner, because that's exactly what happened. Their quality went down because someone convinced them in order to grow more, you can spend less here, right, and you'll make more. You'll put more in your pocket. And yeah, we all need to make money and live and survive. I think the biggest difference with people like you and smaller businesses is that you're not willing to give up on these things that you hold very close to your heart, the reasons why you started the business, just to live a certain lifestyle. Because you might be fine. Yeah, sure, things aren't always easy, but I don't need to go live in a, $8 million house.
Right.
So it's just very interesting to me. And I feel like when you're pitching people like that, that's the thing they're going to say is like, well, you don't really need to have the best ingredients. You could have so-so ingredients, but the ingredients you source too, that's all, again, why I think you fit so well, obviously in the outdoor industry, is we care more about that stuff of where is the fish coming from? Where are the tomatoes? Where's everything coming from? Everything sourced responsibly. And that's why I think it's so much more important too, that you do keep growing and get out there, because you're spreading those messages, which I think so much of our nation and world need to hear, that we need to care about where our food comes from.
Right. Yeah. It's really hard to accept that, I had the opportunity to essentially make a deal, and it could have been like that ticket to ride, right? Mm-hmm. Like, okay, now we're off to the races, and now I'm buying a lake house and blah, blah, blah. Like, I've made it. Mm-hmm. But it's been really interesting for me to reflect since that point and to say, what did I learn in the tank? What can I actually apply? And first and foremost, accepting the fact that Heather's Choice belongs in people's pantries and could become a household name someday. That feels really audacious to say out loud. But that has been my last, I would say, year, is just accepting that this is going to be really big someday. Yeah. And what's all the work that I need to do to be ready for that. Mm-hmm. But then additionally, where am I willing to compromise and what am I not willing to compromise on? And even for the sharks to point out that the fact that we do everything from sourcing the ingredients to prepping to cooking to dehydrating, packaging, shipping, marketing, selling. It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot. So even for me to look for those opportunities in my business where I can let go of control without compromising the quality of experience that the customer is going to have. And that's a really delicate balance, but it's been, I would say the last year has been one of the hardest that I've endured, but simultaneously it's made it really clear to me what I do and don't care about.
Yeah. Well, and that makes it easier to like let go. Like, what things can you outsource? Or are you willing to outsource that won't compromise that experience? And I did a freelance like boot camp course, and we talked about saboteurs. And there was like, I want to say there was 7 of them. There could be more, but like control is like one of them. And it's one of mine personally, for sure, that I'm like, okay, what do I want to do with my life? Because ultimately, whenever I get any position, I get frustrated because I have a lack of control. Like, I want more. And I'm like, okay, how do I let go of that? How do I let go of that? But also, I'm like, I don't fully believe, and maybe that will change, that is a saboteur. I think it's okay to want control because someone does have it, right? So if I'm working for someone and they have someone's always going to be in control. So why can't I just be in control of what I want in my life? If this person can do it over here, the president, whoever, like someone's always at the top controlling. So I should be able to do that without it getting in my way. And yes, there's times that it does, but I think you can find a way to grow how you want to and need to, and also still have control of the things that are important to you.
Right. And that's where, for me, one of the places where I think that we can actually let go of a function of the business and scale is something as simple as having someone else do the fulfillment. And yes, does it feel scary to essentially take all of your precious inventory and send it to somebody else and then let them do that function of the business? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, do I actually care what size box the stuff goes in when it gets shipped to the customer? No. Do I care that the customer gets their product and that the product is intact and like they're getting what they're supposed to get? Yes. Do I actually give a shit whether it's USPS or UPS or FedEx or like, no, I don't.
Yeah.
So that's been one line item on my P&L where I'm like, okay, we are spending a ton of money just warehousing, having staff for this, boxes, inbound, outbound. Like, this is an area of the business that I am willing to make changes that will potentially even make the business better. And that's been a really interesting kind of mind game for me of, okay, what if I make some of these changes and things actually get better?
Yeah.
And not assuming that if I let go of control, everything's going to go to shit. Because even something like the Packaroons, I still think the Packaroons are my $1 million baby. I'm going to sell 1 million cookies next year. That is my like New Year's resolution
I love it.
in August that I'm setting. But even for the Packaroons, us making them ourselves, we make 2,000 cookies a run. It's not enough cookies. And physically standing at those machines, making that stuff with the equipment we have in our little tiny warehouse, like, it's not scalable. And the Sharks were right about that.
Yeah.
So me going to a contract manufacturer and saying, hey, you make millions of cookies a year. Here's my recipe. Can you make these for me? And they're like, yeah, we can make these for you. We'll do 50,000 of them at a time. All of a sudden, that unlocks a huge amount of opportunity. Yeah. And if they can do it for cheaper than I'm doing it, it's a win-win everywhere. But that doesn't feel like compromising the quality.
Right.
That feels like just being a smart businesswoman.
Yeah. Well, because so you're sending, to do something like that, you are sending them the recipe and the ingredients, or are they now sourcing ingredients, or are you sourcing ingredients, sending everything just to them?
That's
and all they're doing is making it, or how does that work?
You can do it either way. So they have some co-manufacturers which will do tolling. Mm-hmm. So you would basically send them, all your coconut and almond flour and maple syrup. So you would still manage all the ingredients, send it to them, they run it through their equipment, and then they charge you a tolling fee. Mm-hmm. Or you can find a co-manufacturer that's turnkey, where you say, this is my spec, it's a 1 ounce cookie in this wrapper, like I'll send you the packaging, but I need a finished product and a finished product price. Mm-hmm. And that's been a whole journey over the last year, is trying to figure out, okay, do I still want to be managing all of the ingredients? Mm-hmm. Or at the end of the day, do I want somebody to send me the perfect blueberry almond macaroon that I can focus on going out there and marketing and selling?
Yeah.
Which is definitely what the Sharks kind of keyed in on, mm-hmm. of like, you're so caught up in the day-to-day management of every single aspect of this business, you're not doing the thing we need you to be doing, which is getting out there and selling this stuff.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's hard, as this is literally your baby that you made in dehydrators on the kitchen counter, like from day one, and have never stepped away from that. You're still making the macaroons, like on the line and doing everything. So it's got to be incredibly hard to step away from that at all. And I'm sure they understand, obviously, and they get tons of people like this all the time who don't make the deals because they're not ready to. But then that's another thing in itself of just not being ready.
Right.
So it was a great learning experience. You've got valuable feedback, but ultimately you weren't in the place that you wanted to make a deal, and you weren't ready to compromise on those things that they were telling you to right now. Also, that's something I also just put out in my email newsletter yesterday about, like, until you're ready to make the change, it's not going to happen. Anyone can yell at you from the rooftops, and until they're blue in the face, and you can complain about that same thing till you're blue in the face, but it's not going to actually change until something clicks. So what you're yelling to the people about Heather's Choice are things that you're also saying to yourself 10,000 times before, like, okay, yeah, this is what I need to do. Right. I do need to let go here, and, maybe not even look at it as a compromise. Like, I'm not compromising the quality so much, or it weighs itself out, because if it's a little less here, it's a lot more here. It's getting into more hands, into more mouths. So it balances out that overall the mission of the business is not compromised.
Totally. Yeah. And that's been really hard for me as an entrepreneur who's been really proud of the fact that we own our manufacturing and we do everything ourselves, to effectively change my tune as a leader and to say, okay, you guys, based on the information I have today, everything points to the smartest decision is to look at outsourcing some of these functions, because otherwise we're constantly going to be running into these same ceilings over and over and over again. And for me, as not only the business owner and founder, but also as the CEO, my job is to grow the business. Mm-hmm. And so if I am actively choosing things that are going to impede us from growing the business, it's not of service to me. It doesn't provide more opportunity for my employees. It doesn't create returns for my investors. So I find myself kind of teetering on that seesaw back and forth of, am I Heather the creative that's just trying to create something beautiful and fun in the world? Or do I have kind of my Heather CEO hat on of like, this is the most sound business decision to make? And obviously you've got to kind of like find that balance in between the two. But I am genuinely excited about some of the changes we're going to make in the next year that do provide more opportunity for me, for the brand, for the people in the company, and gets Heather's Choice in front of a whole new audience of people. It's just also very intimidating.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I wanted to ask about, so I know you have a very small team and everyone's up there in Anchorage. I'm sure you've kept them in the loop with everything. Have you had any like feedback from them or worries of like, they love working for you, obviously. And if you were to grow and change and outsource or do anything, are any of them kind of like, no, don't do it because they're worried that they would lose their job with you? Would you be able to keep them in the company? How does that look for you when thinking about these decisions of like, I've employed this person, I love this person, and if I move,
right,
does that affect those jobs.
Yeah, I think that each person on the team is fully aware of all the dynamics of, okay, clearly what we're doing here is not working because we're not keeping up.
Right.
So like something has to change.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the tricky part is finding that balance between people having a sense of stability in their job, but also wanting the opportunity to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And if they can see that this thing isn't growing and they can see there's nowhere for them to move up,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to leave anyway. And so it just feels like that's a delicate balance for each one of the team members to want growth, to want more opportunity. And that simultaneously comes with the threat of change.
Yep.
And so I don't think that I'm the only person in the company who's like, okay, what's this going to mean to my lifestyle if the business takes off like a rocket ship?
Yep.
And I'm sure for my employees too, they're like, okay, well, if we find a 3PL partner and I'm the warehouse girl, like, does my job go away?
Right.
And so having to have those conversations and say, yes, this job function could go away, but maybe that opens up a different role and a different position that you could fulfill because the business is going to evolve and change every month, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
Things are always changing.
I listened to, on the way down here, the podcast, I started it anyways, the podcast you just did of your own, this series that you started. Yeah, with Jen from Alpine Fit. And you mentioned there that you've grown 70%. And now our listeners, there's some in the outdoor industry, and I'm sure there's some out there who are in the like buying side or have a little more business sense of that. But can you, in the most layman's terms, like explain to people what growing 70% in 1 year is like? What does that mean? And what is that like? Obviously, we've talked about it a bit since Shark Tank and what we just all talked about, but a little, just let the people know how big that actually is.
Yeah, it's a big deal for us because in the year 23, we did, about $1 million. So let's say this year we're going to end at 1.7. If you think about, just for easy math, let's just double it because 70%, we're just going to round up. Mm-hmm. If you think about doubling your business, for us, it's double the number of production staff. It is double the number of orders that get picked and packed. It's ordering twice as many ingredients. And there's so many functions in the business where you're not doing it once, you're doing twice as much, which for us, I don't know how we've pulled it off, but our team is still really freaking small. We've had 9 to 10 people all year.
Wow.
But we've been able to do 70% more business, honestly, just out of everybody's sheer grit and determination. Like there hasn't been that much functionally in the business that has changed. We've actually constricted our size. We have a really tight, small team of people, but everybody has just worked their tail off to get product out the door. And it's not easy, and it's really hard from a cash flow perspective. And that's something that I think, again, people don't really understand is, sure, it's great when you get 70% more wholesale orders, but there's 70% more like free flowing cash you need to have to make all of that product.
Yeah.
And that was really eye-opening for me this spring when I would find myself like losing my mind of how on God's green earth can the business have grown so much? How can we now be operating at a break even and I still have no cash? And it took somebody else looking at the business and saying, Heather, like, of course you don't have any cash. You've got X amount tied up in raw materials. You have X amount tied up in finished goods. You have X amount that's owed to you from your retailers. You still have the fixed overhead costs of you and your 9 employees and your production space. And I think that that's why we see so many food brands or so many brands that just say, screw it, I'm going to have somebody else make everything so that I don't have to incur the overhead expense. And for us as a business, that overhead every single month is a lot to cover just to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
So growing 70% is not something I would recommend. It's really hard.
Yeah.
So as I look at next year, we know there's a shit ton more demand, but do we have the cash resources we need to actually keep up with that?
Yeah, and that's what I love that you explained that a bit, because I think if you don't know anything about the back ends of business and cash flow and things, which I certainly don't know much, but seeing that, like, oh, you've grown 70%, I think first thought is like, oh my God, it's working. Like, it's working, Heather. What do you mean? You're not shouting like into the void. You've grown 70%. You're there. You're on the way. But like you just, that doesn't sound sustainable, and it still doesn't mean that, oh yeah, I'm just raking in the dough now, we're all good, we grew 70%, all that money from orders is just in the pocket, we're set. Like, nope, that's still, and that puts it in a whole nother perspective of, with that growth, it's still not in the green and profiting. That it's just a whole other side of business people don't think about. I don't want to scare people to like not start businesses, but these are the things that we don't know a lot about until you get in it and you're in the thick of it. And you've been doing this 10 years. And is this the first year that you've grown that much in a year?
Yeah, this is our first year that it's been, over 40% year over year growth, which when you're starting early, going from 100,000 to 200,000, you're like, we grew 100%. Like, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, that is true. This feels a little bit different. And yeah, I am very curious to see what next year is going to bring, because there's so much we can't say yes to unless we have the resources we need to do it.
Right.
And that was probably one of my biggest learning lessons from 2023 was I was trying to execute on a strategic plan, hiring sales reps, hiring a marketing agency, hiring more team members, I did a lot to set the business up to effectively triple, but I was also raising money in order to pay for all of that growth. So when the dollars weren't coming in, that whole strategic plan kind of blew up on me of like, oh, we actually have a great plan. We have the demand, but we don't have the straight up cold hard cash to do this. And I think that's where it's really interesting with that Wherever You May Roam series that we're doing now. You will hear from a lot of founders who will say, I took out a mortgage on my house. My spouse floated us while I invested every dollar into this. I took out an SBA loan, or I raised money from investors. Like, somewhere that money has to come from in order for you to make that upfront investment and say, I'm willing to take a gamble on this. So I'm really excited about that series because I think it helps other people understand why small businesses or why fast growing startups are constantly raising money, because especially as a product-based business, you always need more cash.
Yeah. And you're always paying for something.
Always.
Everything's always something's always tied up. Money's always tied up in something because you're in the production stage, some part of it where you're paying for something to be there, the raw materials, the employee doing the thing, the lights to be on. Like, it's not ever just like, cool, we're good, everything's paid for and nothing's happening.
Right. I have one mentor of mine. He's like, Heather, when we were $100 million a year business, so imagine being 100 times bigger than we are today, he said that he still had a $70 million line of credit that he could use because they had a really seasonal business. He said that they made more, their only goal was to make more money in the 5 months of their season than they lost in the other 7 months. But still, even at $100 million a year, you've got $70 million worth of just purchasing that happens in anticipation of that upcoming season. Yeah. So if you don't have access to that, which that's been part of my situation, is I don't own a home. I did not start Heather's Choice with $1 to my name. Like, there has not been this pool of resources somewhere for me to pull on, which is why I've had to do so much fundraising. And again, not everybody's story is like that, but I hope that in sharing my story, there's somebody else out there who maybe doesn't have any money or doesn't have what they feel like is enough to get started. And I look forward to the day that Heather's Choice is a raving success story. And I'll be like, yeah, I had $5,000 when I started this. And that $5,000 went real fast.
And that was 10 years ago.
Right.
I mean, now you have to be like $10,000 and that's gone in a week or two. Like that's just gone. That's if it even covered much to get started at all.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a really important conversation to have because even, like I said, who the audience out there just listening, lots of them are just involved in the outdoor industry somehow, whether they're just recreating professionally or whatnot. But one thing we like to do, obviously, is share the stories of the people we have on that, yeah, it wasn't a success overnight. Still grinding day in, day out. And that's just what it takes. Manifesting, awesome. But let's also talk about manifesting isn't literally closing your eyes and the next day it appears out of the thin air. It takes years. You're manifesting, but it might not be till 15 years later that, wow, I thought about this one day. I thought it could happen and it finally did. Like, we just don't know how long it's going to take. And you have to have that, like you said, you can imagine what it will be in pantries. It will be huge. You have to hold on to that so tightly and until it does happen. So I also feel like it's manifesting, but it's also just not giving up.
Yeah.
It's not giving up. It's fighting for it. And with our conversation we had with Allison, who was a experienced buyer and sales rep and sales rep agency owner, we brought up the fact of just kind of shining the light on the back end of this industry that many people don't know about. When you walk into a store, you're not thinking about who put this display together and how much thought's actually behind it, and that they're already a year out and planning what the store will look like next year. And I was just hoping that would give people a look into just making smarter choices when buying things, knowing like, hey, there was so much more that went into me buying this shirt than just walking in and picking it off the rack. So with your story too, of just showing that these in like fundraisers and things, why it's important to support small businesses and why businesses that you might think are successful because you're an REI, like, why are you fundraising? Because I've had those thoughts when I've seen Kickstarters go on by a business that I think is like, oh, I thought you were doing fine. You're in stores, you all the trade shows. Like, why do you need a Kickstarter? That's for like Mary down the street who's working out of her garage still.
Right.
But it's not. And like clearly, because I'm not a product-based business. I have a hard time even saying I'm like a service-based business with the podcast, but I'm like, how the hell do I get crowd fund, like, money from people when it's just going into the production of this podcast? Now I see people with products. I'm like, you need 10 times, 100 times more than money. And you're still having to ask your community for it, which is where you're at now with the We Fund campaign. So again, like I said, I want people out there to understand why businesses who you might think from first look are successful because they're in stores rely on you listeners out there in these community effort fundraising things.
Yeah. I will say that for us, I was beating the pavement for 18 months trying to court angel investors individually, one at a time. I went on a lot of dates.
I was going to say.
I did a lot of dating and just, like literally flying to different states to meet somebody in person to say, hey, you've shown interest in investing in the business. I've come all the way out here. We're going to start this due diligence process. Like, fundraising is a grind because the person who is putting money into your business is effectively placing a bet. Mm-hmm. And so they are trying to gather as much information as they can to see, am I making a sound investment? Is this a good bet? Is it a bad bet? So like, no shade being thrown to people who are active angel investors because they've gotten me to where I am today.
Yeah.
But there came this point in time of, okay, let's say that there's not a ton of activity happening in the angel network, which is true. Just the last year and a half, you ask anybody and it's been tough. And then you also have venture capital firms that maybe have money to invest, but it's a long lead time. You basically need to have 6 to 9 months worth of runway, so cash in the bank, to float you until a deal may or may not close.
You're not just going and saying, hey, can I buy you a coffee? And you hand me $100,000 check.
Or
we're good.
10 million bucks. Yeah, whatever it is.
Yeah, however many zeros are behind that one,
Exactly.
It's not, I think that's one thing too that you don't see on the back end of like, it can take a year or longer to see that money come through. So how do you survive till you get that check?
And that's where when people, if people saw our episode, we were in that dark night of the soul, or that crevasse that companies die in. Like you effectively run out of runway while you are raising more capital, and then it's game over. Wow. And I can't tell you how many companies I've personally seen hit that chasm and they die. It's freaking game over. And I was really fortunate that I had a community of people around me who just held my hand every single day to get us through that and get us to the other side. But it's unbelievably hard. So for us, I was like, okay, doing this sort of dating game, asking for $100,000 checks, like it's a grind for sure. Going and pitching venture capitalists is also a grind. And I quite frankly don't have the leverage to go into those conversations, because they can know if I string this girl along long enough and she runs out of money and she gets desperate, then I can get a better deal. I'm not saying all VCs are that way, but like you have to know as a founder, if you go in desperate, just like if you're dating, people can just
smell the blood in the water.
Yes. So knowing that I do intend on raising tons of money for Heather's Choice and being unbelievably successful with this, in the meantime, there is still just straight up cash we need to make more inventory. And using a platform like WeFunder or Republic or Startup Engine, there's tons of them out there. But with WeFunder, you can effectively go to your community and say, hey, I don't need you to write me $100,000 check. You can put in $100 and tell your 10 friends. And all of a sudden there's $1,000 of the 1.2 million we're trying to raise. And it makes it a little bit more democratized, where rather than only being able to raise money from accredited investors, you make that opportunity to invest accessible to everyone, which I think is super cool. Like after this, I'm going to grab beers with somebody who's been a customer of ours for probably 7 or 8 years, that picked up the phone and called me as soon as they saw the WeFunder, and they were just elated that this was even an opportunity available to them to own a piece of a company that they like, know, and trust, and to take money that they have allocated to stocks in companies that realistically they probably don't have any connection to. And to allocate some of that money to a brand that they do know and do love and do support. So, time will tell whether or not the WeFunder is going to be a complete success for us, because we've raised 10%, give or take, of the total fundraising goal.
In how long?
2 weeks. Which, thank you for asking that, because my self-doubt gets really loud. And then I have to be like, Heather, it's been 2 weeks.
Yes.
This is a 6-month endeavor.
Yeah.
Do not judge the success of this 2 weeks into it.
No, not at all. But I mean, it's because those things just pick up steam and lose steam, pick up steam and lose steam.
Right.
But to see that you've gotten that far, and I see that you're probably just waiting in a way for that 6 months to be over, like, okay, what are we going to get to? Just kind of close my eyes until the ride's over. Like, what do we get to? I don't want to look like I'd be looking every day, but that's huge. 10% in 2 weeks.
Yeah, it was really humbling for me that we started off by emailing our top customers, and then we emailed all of our customers and then everybody on our email list.
So like your top customers, like an individual, like D2C, not a retailer. Correct. Who is like, maybe they personally want to invest. This is a person who comes to the website, orders food to their house.
Yes.
All the time.
Going to those people and saying, hey, this is a super cool opportunity. You probably have not heard of crowdfunding. You've maybe never even thought about yourself as an investor. And I think we ended up with 120 investors in that first week of our launch. And I can't read the comments on the campaign page without crying.
Oh.
It's so overwhelming
Wow.
to see the support we've already gotten. But back to just exactly how we started this conversation, if I look at the analytics on our campaign page, I'm like, oh, there's been like 1,000 people who have even clicked on the damn link. I feel like a broken record. I feel like I've been talking about it a lot. But if we're converting 10% of people who come to this campaign page, that's pretty freaking good.
Yeah.
But that means I've still only reached about 1,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Of just sounding like a broken record, me thinking I sound like a broken record, but in all reality, still nobody has heard about WeFunder. Nobody has heard about crowdfunding. Nobody has any idea what I'm talking about. So I have to talk about it incessantly.
Yeah, totally. Well, as it grows too, and as I think it's super cool, the WeFunder, how everyone who donates, $100 is the minimum to be like an investor or get that title. There's so many people who think that's so cool. Like you said, they
so
never
cool.
would think that I could be an investor in anything. You think that's someone who's got thousands, tens of thousands of dollars to invest in something. I love that idea of like, I could be an investor of Heather's Choice for $100. I can do that.
Isn't that
I can
fun?
afford that. And that's just awesome to think and feel and have. We're a society who loves titles. So you can say that I'm an investor of a company at your next dinner party, Yeah, like serving it up. Here is Heather's Choice, my company,
I know, and
some people do that as investors, get a little bit crazy, taking too much credit, but
that's fine. I had people coming up to the booth this week that were just enamored of like, oh my God, you've been on Shark Tank. I watch every episode and I love that show. So that was one dynamic. But then they would grab packaroons. They're like, I can't wait to tell my friends that I met this girl that was on TV. And I'm like, here's a little flyer that says you can become an investor. Like you can take it one step further. So yeah, there's definitely people who are enamored with the journey that we've had. And I think my motivation of sharing that whole experience is just, I had no idea what I was doing. I've never known. I've just been like following the breadcrumbs. All of it is super doable, super attainable. And it makes for a very interesting story and a very wild ride, which for me as a person, I am just here for the fullest experience that I can have. Mm-hmm. And part of that has been the grind that is building a business from nothing.
Yeah. It's a wild ride that just never ends until you decide that you are going to let go of everything and sit at the top and collect the cash or something, And I don't think that you'd be a person who would ever do that anyways. If it came down to it, it would be like, I have to step away and put it in the reins of someone else before I can be involved and not do anything.
Right.
With WeFunder, I think that plenty of our audience is familiar with like GoFundMe's or Kickstarters. So how does it differ in any way from those other than it obviously gives you the investor title?
Yeah, very, very different. So if I think about a GoFundMe, I think about a straight up donation.
Okay.
You're going on a trip, or I think my little brother did a GoFundMe to help fund his band going on their first tour. And there is no expectation that I'm ever going to get anything back for that $50 or whatever. Right. With Kickstarter, if I'm pledging to a Kickstarter, which we've done this before, I'm assuming that if I put in $100 or whatever the amount is, I'm going to receive some sort of product. Mm-hmm. So you'll see brands, like you mentioned, that will launch multiple Kickstarter campaigns and use it as a marketing tool every time they want to launch a new product.
Right.
So like, I don't know if you've seen Livesyn and Nara.
Yeah, that's exactly who I had in mind, was of the most recent of like, you see these brands at these big trade shows, you're like, wait, why are you doing it? Kickstarter? But again, because we just don't know what it takes on the back end as the consumer to get these things launched. But
yeah, so Kickstarter, that would be, I would imagine it more like a pre-order, right? They probably put up that campaign and said, okay, we're going to hit X amount of funding and we're going to use that to actually pay for that first production run, which is genius. Like I'm all for Kickstarter campaigns. WeFunder is different in the sense that people are effectively becoming investors in your business. And so the returns they should expect is if Heather's Choice becomes the next Cliff Bar story someday and sells for $1 billion, and I bought in at a $10 million price tag, my investment, my $100 is now worth however many multiples more. I can't even do the math from 10 million to $1 billion. It's a lot of millions.
Yeah.
More. And I don't know that people understand that, sure, you're going to put in your $100 as an example.
Mm-hmm.
The unaccredited investors can invest up to $2,500. So let's say somebody maxes out, they put in $2,500. That return could be next year. It could be 25 years from now. Like, you are gambling. You are playing the game.
Well, it is actually like investing as a angel investors, and obviously on a smaller scale than usually you do there, but as an investment, usually you see something back in return. And so WeFunder is that.
It's exactly that.
And it's not just the fun title that you get to say, like, I gave him $100 and now I can say, like, you don't get a I voted like sticker for like I invested. You should make those.
I should make those
in November for everyone who does an I invested.
I love this idea. Yes, I'm going to take that and make I invested stickers. Yeah, it's definitely more akin to investing in the stock market.
Okay.
Sure. Like, you can't come to me and say, like, I would like to sell my shares. I'll be like, sorry, no, they're not liquid right now. So it is more like gambling, but you see this all the time. Well, maybe all the time is not accurate, but I see it all the time with other brands that I follow, like Epic Bar. I don't know if you ever ate their products.
That's my meat stick.
So they,
in my bag, always.
Yeah, love that brand.
Yeah.
Think they're the coolest. They were doing $20 million a year in revenue when General Mills bought them for $100 million. And you can imagine, like, that's life-changing stuff, not just for them, but also for their early investors.
Yeah.
I talked to one guy recently.
Wow.
He had a brother-in-law or something. The dude put in $25,000. However many years later, that $25,000 turned into $1 million.
I love that this has kind of turned into talking a little bit about investing, because I know dog shit about investing and all that. And I've been thinking for years, like, I really should, look into some things, because my boyfriend's got stocks. He's well versed in that. I'm even like, I just need to ask him. But I'm always like, I don't feel like I have enough cash in my hand to invest in anything, because, like, I need that to pay this bill. So totally. I can't, like, invest in that and hope something happens, because I'm also the one who would be like, sell now.
Right,
sell
totally.
now. It's upsell. Like, I can't, like, I almost need someone to go steal some money from me and put it somewhere and be like, hey, I did this for you. Like, oh my God, thank you. But it is definitely just giving me so much more insight to how things work, and being more willing to looking at things and businesses that you care about and are willing to take a risk on, because it's a bet. But something as minimal as $100, or when you can digest the amount of money that you're putting into it, it gives me a whole new view of it. Like I said, other than like just thinking of big money in the stock market in a big business. Right. It makes it feel possible for me and a lot of the listeners out there that you can do this. You can invest your money in something you care about and hope for the best, for sure, obviously. But like I said, it doesn't have to be this big kind of crazy idea. I feel like you can never do this.
Right. And what I love about it is if somebody, let's say they have a healthy savings account, they have money in the stock market, they've got a retirement fund, they've like got their financial ducks in a row. It's crazy for me because I'm not in that position, but there are people out there like that who are then wondering, what do I do with my money?
Yeah.
What do I do with my money that would be fun, that would be interesting, and does feel a little risky or risque? Like, I have investors who literally said to me, Heather, I have always played it safe. And for me, this is a really big deal because I am effectively taking a risk, which is interesting for me as a founder because I feel like I live my life borderline on the edge all the time, where my risk tolerance is so high that I'm kind of like, well,
yeah, I've never not been at risk. I flew out of a fire truck last weekend, like whole another story, but like,
totally.
It blows my mind too when people are like, oh, I don't know, this sounds scary. I'm like, opposed to what?
Right. And so that's what's fun about this campaign and this WeFunder platform is if there's somebody out there who's like, I don't necessarily want to take the risk of starting my own business and putting my whole entire ass on the line, but I support other people who are doing that, they can. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be $100,000 or $1 million check. It can be anything from $100 to $2,500. And again, it's if you reach a large enough audience of people to find 12,000 people with $100.
Yeah. Wow.
That's life-changing for me, for Brad, Brooke, Quinn, Aaron, Austin, like everybody who works at Heather's Choice, that amount of money would change the reality that we live in.
Yeah.
And I don't know that people even put those two things together, that their investment in a small business has a dramatic, direct impact on the people who work in that company. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine my employees are like, go do it. Raise the money.
Yeah, that's a great point with small businesses. Again, I think a lot of our audience is more in tune with small business than other people are, but you don't see that ripple effect in larger businesses. That money is going in a couple people's pockets if it's not going right back into the business. With small businesses, someone's getting paid more.
They're getting health insurance.
Yeah. Let's talk about just that. Like health insurance in our country. That doesn't just come easy to anybody. So that's just so huge when you are really thinking about where you're going to put your money, whether you've never invested before or do it all the time. Like just making smarter choices, especially rather than just am I going to make money back on this, or how much am I going to make on it? You're risking anyways. You're never going to be guaranteed that money you're getting back in the stock market with a huge company. Every other day that thing's like in the red. So like your $20,000 you thought was safe with Apple or something is definitely not. So
yeah, I feel
no
like
matter
our
what,
generation,
you're playing a game.
Yeah, and our generation, I feel like, has seen that so many times over and over again. I don't know if this is true or not, but I feel like millennials were just screwed because we've seen so many catastrophes.
So jaded.
We're like, we're just waiting to see what happens next.
And that brings me back to the beginning of the conversation or earlier on, and you said something about just kind of letting go of the thought of, if I let go and use a co-packer or something, what if I have the mindset of, what if this works out, instead of like, well, I have to plan for disaster if I do this. I have my backup plan that, the first sign of something going wrong, I'm down there, I'm moving us out, I'm doing something, and somebody's like, hey, this could be the ticket. Like, this is great. This is going to be such a fun experiment. Just always straight to the backup plan, the disaster relief, like gotta have it all ready to go.
Totally.
Which, I think you have to have a realistic view. And I think having backup plans like that is great. But I struggle with having the positive outlook, even also live like there as well. It's just always like, no, this is what I need to do if it goes bad, instead of like, what would I do if it went well? Will I get that lake house?
Right. That's what I've been trying to set the intention for. I'm not trying. I am setting the intention for in 2025 that this is going to be fun.
Yes.
Because as weird as it sounds, I do think it'd be fun to sell 1 million pack runes. I think it would be fun to go to these big ass warehouses and get a tour and see other people picking and packing orders and being like, holy smokes, they're fast.
Yeah.
Or there's so many possibilities that I do see. It can be fun. It can be better for me as a lifestyle. It can be better for my employees. Like, things can change and materialize. And that's the intention that I did set with this WeFunder of, this could be fun. I could interview other founders just like me, tell their stories, invite people to learn about something that they've maybe never considered before. And that's been very in alignment for me as a person of I just know myself at this point. I trip and fall on my face and roll around in the mud and I get back up and then I'm like, hey, don't go that way.
Yeah.
That
Yes.
is my life story.
And I, at one point in my life had to, I don't know, I was probably doing some course or something and you had to write a haiku about your spirit animal or something. And like mine was a salmon because I'm constantly swimming upstream. Like all I do is the hard thing, but I get to tell people I wouldn't do it that way. Someone's got to do it. You hear that. And that's the thing is when you're learning from other people, they're telling you what not to do. Sometimes you're finding your own road. So I'm like, yeah, I choose to be the one who finds my own road instead of has a path to follow. But I'm more than happy to give someone that path to follow. So we all can make choices in life and do things where you're going to find out the hard way. But there's also the times and places where you can, maybe take that easy path. I happen to choose that a little less often. And it sounds like you're the same, but there's going to be things that you're going to learn. And as it goes, you can take that easier route. Now that you've taken so many of the hard routes, soon, as you grow, something new might come along where you're like, oh, no, I'm not going to go that way. I am going to do what this person offered me or told me to do.
Yeah.
But
definitely.
It's, it's so great to see that you are growing. You still have this huge vision for Heather's Choice. You've offered it up to just the community to be a part of, to invest in. I think that in itself shows how much you actually care about the people who like getting the product, that you just care so much about what they're putting into their bodies. Because that's how it all started anyways in the first place. Giving people good food, being well nourished, and how can we get this into more people's hands? With WeFunder having 1,000 people backing right now, eventually they will start telling other people. They'll tell their 5 friends, 10 friends, and it will get to that 12,000 without you having to tell each of those 12,000 people from the rooftops of like, hey, here's WeFunder. But 2 weeks, here's 2 weeks in. Remember that.
Yeah.
Every day.
And again, I hope that people understand that self-doubt is still so loud. But if my friend Chris was sitting here with us, he would say, I've been trying to get Heather to launch this WeFunder campaign since November. So I successfully drug my feet on this for 9 months because I was scared, because I was intimidated. You literally put all of your business financials out there. Mm-hmm. You make all of that public to your competitors, to your staff, to your customers. Like everybody can see the last 2 years of financial performance. And it took a lot for me to get over that and to be that level of vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely been a growth edge for me of just being like, okay, 1, I'm not willing to quit, even though I've had people after Shark Tank who reached out. Two of thousands of people who reached out were like, you should just put a bullet in this thing and be done. But again, those negative opinions are loud, but having to consciously decide, no, I'm not willing to listen to that feedback. I am going to keep going because to me, this is a story of tenacity. Mm-hmm. This is an opportunity for me to grow and to push through that resistance and the discomfort that I feel, because I think about it all too often, going through my own experience of, some sympathy for myself and being like, okay, if I was to go in one day and say, you know what, guys, like I'm done. Mm-hmm. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm burnt out. I'm tired. I'm whatever. What the hell kind of example is that setting?
Also, what's the alternative? Like, what is the alternative for you if you put the bullet in it and walked away? Like, because that's what I think about when I like want to move on or quit doing this or that is, well, what I don't always have an answer, but the question is, what am I going to do next? And that just kind of regrounds me of, okay, yeah, do I want this? Is it worth it to me or whatnot? And I think that's the thing that most people need to ask themselves. Like, what is the alternative? you going to go work for Cliff Bar? You know, like, what are you going to do?
I'm pretty sure my friend Amy's on speed dial, and I will call her some days and be like, I'm ready to go work at the gem shop.
Yeah.
This is one of those days where I am ready to just disappear, and I don't care. I will be a barista.
I will work at 7-Eleven for sure.
Totally. Just anything but this.
Yeah.
But that's why my personal community of friends has been so critical in all this, because they're like, I hear you. It's okay for you to say that. And I'm going to remind you that you are going to feel different tomorrow.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I had half of those thoughts just this morning too. It just hits sometimes out of nowhere. You're like, what am I doing and why? Where's the light at the end of the tunnel? How long do I have to keep going and trudging through the mud? Is this just what it is for me? But again, the alternative is having no control and giving it to all to somebody else. And I cannot do that. I've been more unsuccessful in that than other things. So it all comes down to that want that you have inside, and that fire and the reasoning and the whys and all that behind it. And I, like I said, just your tenacity in it is something I come back to a lot as our first conversation, and just learning like, wow, 10 years, you've been at it 10 years. Again, just puts it in so much great perspective of this is what it takes. This is what it takes. I talked to another Maria from Pocampo, 5 years. Again, it's just like, we don't see that or hear these stories from like the big brands. They also went through these times, and sometimes you just get that break sooner than others. But most often, more businesses than not are still just trudging along.
Did you listen to that How I Built This with Osprey Packs?
No.
Oh, I'm pretty sure he says in there it took him 20 years to get to his first million. And then eventually he sold it for, I don't know, 144 or 44 million. I don't know what the number was. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It was many, many years of him just doing his thing, plucking along. And then there was some inflection point that happened. And I do think about that, of the time-boundedness that we put on our goals. And it's like, okay, if I started this business when I was 26, if I was 20 years in, if I was 46 years old and it was bigger and better and more successful and more lucrative than my wildest dreams, would I be like, damn, it's 10 years too late?
Yeah.
Like, no, you'd be like, wow, I had 20 years of life experience that was priceless. And win, lose, or draw, that is something that I take a lot of pride in, is just the people that I've met, the experiences that I've had, the knowledge that I've gained. And again, it's all relative. Like the story of Tom's shoes from How I Built This. Tom's first business failed epically, and he lost hundreds of thousands of dollars of family and friend money.
Wow.
And he felt terrible about that. But that dude still pulled himself up by his boots and started something brand new that was unbelievably successful. And I think for me, I've just decided that, I'm willing to give this every single fiber of my being. And if it doesn't work, it will not be for lack of effort and for lack of trying. But I grapple with that often, because I'm sure there are 99.9% of people that would have quit by this point.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so you're going to have more regret not doing it and not trying. And we tell our kids this for wrestling all the time, is like, you are going to think about this more if you walk off the mat and didn't give it everything you had. You're going to remember that. You're going to regret that. So if you're absolutely putting in all the effort, you gave it everything you fucking had until you had to walk away, it's going to give you, obviously it's not going to make it easier per se, but it will give you a little bit more of just relief knowing that you did. And there's always going to be the question of what if? Maybe I could have done more. Maybe I could have done more. But truly you'll know, like, I couldn't have. And that could be just something in how life happens. Like, I'm at a point now that I can't give any more. That's fine. But if you just don't give any at all or give it a half-assed try, you're going to know that, and you got to be okay with that. But
yeah.
So you're going to know that you traipsed around this entire country trying to get Heather's Choice out there, and you're still doing it, and you're not going to give up until it's time to walk away. And that will be when it's just handing the reins off to someone else as a huge success.
Yeah, that's definitely a fun vision for me to think about, is even having that roadmap of, okay, I can see how we would take this to 50 million and beyond. I can see it being a huge success story. And even knowing for me, like going from 1 million to 10 million, that's going to be pretty fun and interesting. And once we get to that 10 million mark, I get to decide, do I want to be the person in charge to take it from 10 to 50 or 50 to 100? Or am I at peace of like, all right, this is now something that I can hand to somebody else who has the skill set to grow it, who has the burning desire to take it from here to the next point. And right now I do have the desire to go from 1 to 10 because I can see it. Yes, it is so freaking clear in my mind. And I'm still very curious what that's going to look like, how I'm going to have to change as a person, how the business is going to have to change, how the product is going to evolve. And the jury's still out, whether or not Packarons or meals or something else is going to be the thing that just takes off. So that keeps me very curious.
What do you think thus far, if you can't even pinpoint it, has been like the biggest life lesson? Like what's changed you the most in this journey of Heather's Choice?
I think the thing I'm still bumping up against that I think a lot of people will be able to relate to is deservability. When you go out and ask people for money, whether it's $100 via WeFunder, or it's $1 million, or it's $10 for this thing it doesn't matter. There is always this fuzz over your vision that is like, do I deserve this or not? And I feel like right now I am definitely bumping up against that of, even if somebody rolled up tomorrow and they're like, I want to put 10 million bucks into this idea, it would send alarm bells off for me internally of like, what the hell did I do to deserve this? Do I even deserve this? Is this too good to be true? Is this person pulling my leg? And that feels like such a big lesson for me as a person to really accept that somebody is putting in $2,500, $100. It doesn't matter what the number is. It's still just kind of fires up my nervous system a little bit of like, oh God, this is now causing me to have to come to grips with, I deserve it. Yeah. And I deserve this level of support from people. So it doesn't feel like a life lesson that I have by any means mastered. It feels like the one that I'm living. And I think for anybody who's thinking about starting a business or who is in the process of building one, they probably have a similar experience of, you start to receive support, you start to receive the outpouring of appreciation from customers, or somebody shows up and they want to support you financially. It forces you to have to come to grips with, do I believe that I deserve this or not?
I love that, because that was my next kind of question of, what piece of advice would you give to somebody who wanted to start their own business, whether product-based, service-based, or just, take that risk of doing something on their own?
I am pro everybody doing it because it forces you to grow so much. And it doesn't matter what your flavor of insecurity is, it is going to show itself. Yeah. And again, my friend Amy is a perfect example of this, of somebody who's been unbelievably successful in the corporate world, who decided, I'm done with that. I'm going to start something on my own. And her and I have conversations weekly of like, this is my shadow, or this is the thing that is coming up for me. And it's going to continue to come up until I face it head on. Yeah. And I just think that it doesn't matter what type of business you are starting, you are going to bump up against your own growth edges. And that is such a gift. Yeah. And I do wonder about that, of the example that I've set for my staff, you know, my staff being people who someday will start their own businesses, right? And I imagine they're like, okay, well, don't start a dehydrated food business. That's a racket. But whatever they end up doing, they're going to bump up against problems, issues, and then you really see, okay, what kind of a person am I?
Yeah.
And I will say that for myself, it's been really valuable to see that no matter how hard it gets and how shitty of a situation I'm in, integrity, honesty, transparency is still front and center of like, okay, I've got to have a really hard conversation. I've got to make a really hard decision. I need to do whatever. But that is a value set of mine that I've never been willing to compromise on, which also gives me a sense of pride.
Yeah.
Of people don't have to wonder.
Yes.
I will tell you.
Yes. I love that. I love that. And like just knowing that no matter what you're going to start, everyone has insecurities, and starting your own business will bring those shadows out. And that's okay, because it's something everyone goes through, and you just have to figure out what your own are. And that just helps you throughout life in general, dealing with the day to day, that you're facing this insecurity that so often we put away in a box. We never want to touch it. And that's why so many people are in therapy, because we don't face these things, right? So we got to face the problems, got to face the issues, and business, starting your own, will definitely bring those out for sure. Before we get out of here and wrap up, is there anything else you want to leave with the audience? Sounds like you have had the wildest and hardest year all in one of business. But you're still here. So that's the main thing.
Yeah, I think you already said it earlier that people know what their level of commitment is to the thing. And I think you and I talked about this last time too, that we see that with people who attempt to make a lifestyle change, like I'm going to start going to the gym, or I'm going to change my diet, or I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to start a business. And we all can grade ourselves, and we just know, like, either I gave it hell or I didn't. And I will say that for me, even though I tried countless times to like avoid, run away, get out of this situation, I was so fortunate to have such a strong community of people who could just help redirect me and say, like, Heather, it's safe to keep going. It's safe to just keep marching forward. And I don't think that I could have done that on my own, but it's, you know, it's freaking valuable to witness for yourself. Like, where am I trying to pull the plug and just like save my ego and get out of this? Or where are the points that I am wholeheartedly committing over and over and over again, no matter how long it takes, no matter how hard it gets. And that just feels like such a big question mark for us all to hold, no matter what we're trying to do. Like, what level of commitment do I have to this? What level of effort am I willing to give it? And I think that's directly correlated to like how effing bad you actually want it. And I don't think that people necessarily understand that for someone like me, with the financial situation I was in when I started, or how I've decided to grow the business, there is no backup plan. There is no safety net waiting for me to fall back on. And I think that when the day comes that Heather's Choice is wildly successful, that will be one of the factors. The boats had been burned. It was either sudden death. Swim. Totally. And I do think that safety net or that backup plan can be detrimental to people.
I agree. I definitely agree with that. I think that is where you see the biggest success stories, is there was no other option. So unless it was working at that 7-Eleven, you know, no shame to anyone who chooses that path, but you know what I'm saying? It's just, you looked at your other option, and to you, that was the just death of your soul. And you felt no more life or light in you. And it's easy to not do something when you can just land softly.
Right. And that's, again, it's a scary word to say, but there were so many times in the last 18 months that I was like, this is it. This is over. I'm personally, and the business is filing for bankruptcy, and I am starting over.
Wow.
And no entrepreneur ever wants to get to that point.
Yeah.
But I had to look it in the eye so many times and say, okay, I can at any point just turn off the lights, face the excruciating pain of going through bankruptcy, or I can choose to keep persevering. And when those are your two options, you're like, you know what?
Yeah.
Maybe I will try again tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because it's not like, poof, all my problems are gone.
Yeah.
You just have a completely new set of problems. And I've been fortunate in the sense that it's been very clear what my two options are. Riding so close to the edge for so long, it's either I freaking swim or I sink. And I don't take that for granted because I know plenty of people who started businesses, had businesses that, you know, maybe had a backup plan and it was like, you know what, I don't have to do this anymore. And I think about the analogy often of some of the best fighters in the world. And the people who freaking win are the people who had nothing, who came from nothing. And it was either they freaking win or they die. So it feels kind of dramatic, especially talking about, you know, a business.
Yeah.
But when you're in it, it feels so life and death.
Well, that's what it is in a way. Like it's your livelihood, and it's not only you are taking others down with the ship.
Right.
So that puts a whole nother level of pressure on it. So you're like, I've got a partner, I've got employees and friends, you know, all these things that it's like that it's not just you and you get to walk away. It's this weight on you of knowing that you took other people with you.
Right.
And some of them could go get another job and it might not be as detrimental, but still some are way more directly affected. And maybe they won't even, the job industry right now anyways is like, well, what are they going to do? That could put them down and out for a long time. It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure. And even still, like with the WeFunder campaign, it's assuming even more responsibility. Yeah.
Now there's 120 more people and eventually 12,000 people who are counting on this working, and accepting that responsibility is hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
But I think that for me, knowing that I have a staff, knowing that I have friends and family and investors and people who are looking to me, the last thing I ever want to do is, one, be out of integrity, and then two, give up prematurely just because I wasn't really feeling it.
Yeah.
You know?
Because it was one of those days where you needed a snack or a nap.
Yeah, totally. Like, you just need
Heather,
to go.
why didn't you eat the macaroon?
That was me probably 2 hours before coming here. I was like, my attitude is poor. I need lunch. I need a coffee, and I need to like reset.
Yes.
So we all have those moments, but I think for me, that is a life experience that I would never give up because I know that it's made me stronger as a person.
Yeah.
It's made me more resilient. And I don't care who you are and what business you start, it will make you stronger.
Yes, I love it. I love it. Well, everybody out there, thank you so much for listening, tuning in. I hope everybody learned a lot about the insides of like the financials of small business. And again, another reason as to why, if there's a choice there, you should shop that small business rather than that big brand. And that you're inspired to do that thing, take that risk, take that leap, that jump, and know that you're definitely not alone swimming in those dark waters that starting a business can ensue, whether how small it is, service-based, product-based, whatever it is. Everyone's going to face those when they're on their own. So go do the fucking thing. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and would do us a huge favor, since we don't have any sponsors or anything like that, and would rate and review us on whatever platform it is you use, Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, whatever it is. And if you're listening and downloading just through the website, tearingituppodcast.com, leave comments. We'll definitely engage back with you. And on social media right now, we're just on Instagram. Tearing It Up Podcast is the handle. like the post, share the post, comment on the post, whatever it is you got. Show us your love so we just stay relevant and show up in the rankings at all. So again, rate and review, please, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.